June 27th, 1874, 4:30 in the morning. Billy Dixon jerks awake to the sound of cracking wood. He's 24 years old, professional buffalo hunter, sleeping in a cramped Adobe trading post in the Texas Panhandle called Adobe Walls. The sound that woke him wasn't thunder, it wasn't wind, it was the ridgepole of the building, the main support beam, starting to split. Billy sits up, groggy, reaches for his rifle. Around him, 24 other buffalo hunters are still asleep, snoring, exhausted from weeks of hunting. If that ridgepole collapses, the entire roof comes down, could kill half the men sleeping underneath it. Billy shakes his partner awake. "We gotta fix that beam, now." It's still dark outside. The sun won't rise for another hour, but they can't wait. They grab hammers, nails, props, start working to reinforce the ridgepole. The work is loud, bang, bang, bang. One by one, the other hunters wake up. 28 men total. Hunters, shopkeepers, a blacksmith, all awake now, grumbling, irritated at losing sleep, but they're alive. Because at exactly 5 a.m., 700 Comanche, Cheyenne, and Kiowa warriors charge out of the pre-dawn darkness. If those men had still been asleep, they would have been slaughtered. Instead, what happened over the next 4 days became one of the most remarkable defensive stands in American frontier history. A battle where 28 buffalo hunters, armed with some of the most advanced rifles ever made, held off 700 warriors. A battle where one man made a shot so impossible, the U.S. Army officially measured it and declared it the longest confirmed kill in Wild West history. A battle that broke the power of the Comanche Nation forever. You're listening to Legends of the Frontier. I'm your host, and today we're telling you the true story of the Second Battle of Adobe Walls. Not the Hollywood version, not the sanitized textbook version, the real story. From both sides, with all the complexity, all the violence, all the humanity. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you want more stories like this, stories they don't teach in school, hit that subscribe button. Now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what happened at Adobe Walls, you need to understand what buffalo meant to the Plains Indians, and what white buffalo hunters were doing in Comanche territory in 1874. Section 1. Context: the Buffalo Wars. Let's talk about buffalo. In 1800, there were an estimated 60 million buffalo roaming the Great Plains. By 1890, there were fewer than 1,000. What happened in those 90 years? White buffalo hunters, systematic extermination, industrial-scale slaughter, and it wasn't accidental. In 1874, General Philip Sheridan, commander of U.S. forces on the Great Plains, made his strategy crystal clear. I'm paraphrasing, but this is the gist. These buffalo hunters have done more in the last 2 years to settle the Indian problem than the entire U.S. Army has done in 30 years. They're destroying the Indians' food supply, their clothing, their shelter. For the sake of lasting peace, let them kill every buffalo they can. Translation: starve them into submission. The U.S. government knew that Plains tribes, Comanche, Cheyenne, Kiowa, Arapaho, depended entirely on buffalo. Food, buffalo meat; clothing, buffalo hides; shelter, buffalo hide teepees; tools, buffalo bones and sinew; trade goods, buffalo robes. Destroy the buffalo and you destroy the tribe's ability to resist. And that's exactly what white buffalo hunters did. In the 1870s, professional hunting parties spread across Kansas, Colorado, and Texas. They used high-powered rifles, sharps, 50 caliber, capable of killing a buffalo at 500 yards, and hunted with industrial efficiency. A skilled hunter could kill 50-100 buffalo per day. They'd shoot the herd from a distance, take the hides, leave the meat to rot. One hunter, Orlando Brick Bond, claimed he personally killed 5,000 buffalo in one season. The carcasses piled up, millions of them, rotting on the plains. Buffalo bones became a commodity, shipped east by the ton, ground into fertilizer. For Plains tribes, this wasn't just economic devastation, it was existential. and by 1874, the Comanche had had enough. Section 2. Who were the Comanche? Before we continue, you need to understand who the Comanche were. They weren't some primitive, disorganized tribe. They were the dominant military power on the southern Great Plains for over 150 years. From the 1700s to the 1870s, the Comanche Empire stretched from Kansas to Mexico. They raided Spanish settlements, Mexican towns, Texan homesteads. They fought the Spanish, the Mexicans, the Texans, the U.S. Army, and for most of that time, they won. The Comanche were master horsemen, the best light cavalry in North America, arguably the best in the world at that time. They could shoot arrows accurately at full gallop, reload while riding, use their horses as shields. A Comanche warrior could fire 20 arrows in the time it took a soldier to fire and reload a musket once. They perfected hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, lightning raids. They were feared, respected, absolutely dominant. By the 1860s, that dominance was slipping. The U.S. Civil War had ended. Thousands of battle-hardened veterans headed west. The railroads were expanding, telegraph lines followed, and most importantly, repeating rifles. The technological advantage the Comanche had enjoyed for decades was evaporating, but they weren't done fighting. In 1874, a young Comanche war chief named Quanah Parker decided it was time to strike back. Section 3. Quanah Parker, the last Comanche war chief. Quanah Parker was 29 years old in 1874. Half Comanche, half white. His mother was Cynthia Ann Parker, a white girl captured by Comanche raiders in 1836 when she was 9 years old. She grew up Comanche, married a chief named Peta Nocona, had 3 children, including Quanah. In 1860, Texas Rangers raided the Comanche camp and rescued Cynthia Ann, dragging her away from her family against her will. She never saw her Comanche family again. She tried to escape multiple times, eventually died of grief and starvation in 1870. Quanah Parker grew up knowing his white mother had been stolen from him. He had every reason to hate white settlers. By 1874, Quanah was a respected war leader of the Quahadi Band, the most militant faction of the Comanche Nation. The Quahadi had never signed a treaty, never moved to a reservation, never surrendered, and Quanah Parker intended to keep it that way. In the spring of 1874, Quanah attended a sun dance ceremony hosted by Cheyenne and Kiowa leaders. A medicine man named Issa Tai claimed he'd had a vision from the Great Spirit. The vision promised victory, invulnerability. Bullets would not harm them if they followed Issa Tai's spiritual guidance. Issa Tai urged the warriors to attack the buffalo hunters, drive them from Comanche land, reclaim the buffalo herds, restore the old way of life. Quanah was skeptical of Issa Tai's mysticism, but he knew one thing for certain: if they didn't stop the buffalo hunters, the Comanche were doomed. So in late June 1874, Quanah Parker assembled the largest war party seen on the southern plains in decades. 700 warriors, Comanche, Cheyenne, Kiowa, Arapaho, all united under one purpose: destroy the buffalo hunters at Adobe Walls. Section 4. Adobe Walls, the target. Adobe Walls wasn't a town. It wasn't even a settlement. It was a tiny trading post complex in the middle of nowhere. 3 buildings, all made of adobe brick and sod. 1. Myers and Leonard's trading store, sold supplies to hunters. 2. Hanrahan's saloon, served whiskey and beer. 3. Rath and Company store, another general store, plus a blacksmith shop, a few hide-drying racks. That's it. Located in the Texas Panhandle, about 17 miles northeast of modern-day Stinnett, Texas. The nearest U.S. Army fort, Fort Dodge, was 150 miles away. No telegraph, no backup, completely isolated. Why were buffalo hunters there? Because Adobe Walls was smack in the middle of prime buffalo hunting territory, and because technically they weren't supposed to be there. The Treaty of Medicine Lodge, 1867, had established this area as reservation land for Southern Plains tribes. White hunters weren't allowed. But in 1874, the US government was conveniently ignoring that treaty. So buffalo hunters operated with impunity, slaughtering thousands of buffalo on land that legally belonged to the Comanche. On June 26, 1874, there were 28 men and 1 woman at Adobe walls. Hunters, shopkeepers, teamsters, a cook. They had no idea 700 warriors were about to attack. Section 5. The men at Adobe walls. Let me introduce you to some of the key defenders. Billy Dixon, age 24, professional buffalo hunter, one of the best shots on the plains. He'd killed over 3,000 buffalo in the past 2 years alone. Quiet, competent, deadly accurate with a rifle. Bat Masterson, age 20. Yes, that Bat Masterson. Before he became a legendary lawman, he was a buffalo hunter. Young, cocky, looking to make a name for himself. Billy Ogg, teenage teamster, only 17 years old, scared out of his mind but refused to show it. Hannah Olds, the only woman at Adobe walls, wife of the restaurant owner, tough as nails, would spend the battle loading rifles. James Hanrahan, saloon owner, in his 30s, organized and level-headed under pressure. Bermuda Carlisle, blacksmith. Big, strong, handy with tools and weapons. The Shadler brothers, Tyler and Isaac. Experienced buffalo hunters from Kansas, and about 20 other hunters, teamsters and workers. None of them were soldiers. None had formal military training. They were civilians, entrepreneurs, men trying to make money off the buffalo boom. Most of them slept with their rifles next to their beds, not because they expected an attack, but because this was wild country and you never knew. On the night of June 26th, that paranoia saved their lives. Section 6. The attack begins. 4:30 a.m. June 27, 1874. Billy Dixon and a few others are awake, fixing the cracked ridgepole in Hanrahan's saloon. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of hammers echoes through the silent compound. Other men wake up, grumbling, cursing, wandering outside to piss or get some air. Then someone shouts, "Indians!" Out of the pre-dawn darkness, hundreds of mounted warriors charge straight at Adobe walls. 700 men on horseback, screaming war cries, firing rifles, shooting arrows. The sound is overwhelming. Thunder of hooves, gunshots, shouting, war cries. Billy Dixon later wrote, "They came like a hurricane. I'd never seen so many Indians in one place." The hunters scramble. Some are still half-dressed, some don't have boots on. But every man grabs his rifle. They sprint for the buildings, slam the heavy wooden doors shut, bar them from inside. 2 men, the Shadler brothers, were sleeping in a wagon outside the main buildings. They never made it. The warriors overwhelmed them in seconds, killed them both, scalped them. The rest of the hunters made it inside, barely 28 people, split between 3 buildings, surrounded by 700 warriors. The siege had begun. Section 7. The weapons. Why this wasn't a fair fight. Now, before we continue, you need to understand the weaponry involved, because this wasn't David versus Goliath. This was cutting-edge firearms technology versus traditional weapons. The hunter's arsenal. Primary weapon, Sharp's 1590 Buffalo rifle. This was one of the most powerful single-shot rifles ever made. 50 caliber bullet, 90 grains of black powder. Muzzle velocity, 1,300 feet per second. Effective range, 1,000 yards. Maximum range, over 1,500 yards. A Sharps could drop a 2,000-pound buffalo at 600 yards, one shot. It could punch through an Adobe wall. It could kill a man and his horse with one bullet. The hunters also had Winchester 1873 repeating rifles, 44 to 40 caliber Colt Peacemaker revolvers, 45 caliber, Remington rolling block rifles, unlimited ammunition. They were at trading posts after all. The warriors' arsenal, the Comanche, Cheyenne and Kiowa warriors had traditional bows and arrows, effective range, 50 to 100 yards, lances and clubs, close combat only. Some captured rifles, mostly outdated muzzle loaders, a few Winchester repeaters, stolen or traded, limited ammunition. Here's the critical difference. A Comanche warrior with a bow was devastating at close range. Within 50 yards, he could fire 20 arrows per minute with lethal accuracy. But at 200+ yards, his arrows couldn't reach the buildings. The hunters, meanwhile, could kill at 500, 1,000 yards. The warriors needed to get close to be effective. The hunters could kill them long before they got close. This is why the battle played out the way it did. Section 8, Day 1, the siege. The warriors attacked in waves throughout the morning of June 27th. They'd charge the buildings on horseback, fire rifles and arrows, try to break through doors and windows. The hunters, barricaded inside, fired through gun ports and windows, and they were terrifyingly accurate. Billy Dixon described it later. We could see them clearly. The sun was up. We'd pick our targets, aim carefully, and drop them, horse and rider, again and again. Every time a warrior got within 200 yards, he was shot. The Adobe buildings were essentially fortresses. Thick walls, small windows, sturdy doors, arrows couldn't penetrate. Most rifle bullets couldn't either. The warriors tried everything. They tried to set fire to the buildings. Didn't work. Adobe doesn't burn. They tried to shoot through the windows. The hunters shot back, and the hunters were better shots. They tried to rush the doors, met with concentrated rifle fire. By midday, Quanah Parker realized they were losing warriors for no gain. He called off the direct assaults, but he didn't retreat. The warriors surrounded the compound, set up positions on ridges 400, 600 yards away, and they waited. The plan: starve them out. They have to leave eventually. But Quanah had made a critical miscalculation. The hunters weren't just armed. They had food, water, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. They could wait as long as necessary. Section 9. Quanah Parker is wounded. At some point during the first day's fighting, Quanah Parker made a mistake. He rode too close. He was trying to rally his warriors, shouting encouragement, leading by example. A bullet struck him. Some accounts say it hit his shoulder. Others say his back. Either way, it was serious. Quanah was knocked off his horse. Other warriors dragged him to safety. He survived, but he was out of the fight. Without Quanah's leadership, the attack lost coordination. Different bands of warriors started acting independently. Some wanted to keep fighting. Others wanted to retreat. Isatai, the medicine man who'd promised invulnerability, was nowhere to be seen. Turns out, bullets did harm them. The warriors' morale was crumbling, but they didn't leave, not yet. Because leaving meant admitting defeat, and they weren't ready to do that. Section 10, the standoff. Days 2 and 3, June 28th and 29th, 1874. The warriors maintained a loose siege around Adobe walls. They didn't attack directly anymore. Too costly. Instead, they tried to pick off anyone who came outside. The hunters stayed inside, rationed food and water, took turns sleeping. It was tense, exhausting, nerve-wracking. But the hunters had one major advantage: patience. They knew reinforcements would come eventually. They just had to wait. The warriors knew it too, which meant they were running out of time. On June 29th, a group of warriors drove off the hunters' horses, about 50 animals grazing near the compound. This was a huge blow. Without horses, the hunters couldn't leave, couldn't hunt, couldn't escape if they needed to. But it also didn't matter, because the hunters were dug in. They weren't planning to leave. By the morning of June 30th, the warriors were getting frustrated. They'd lost dozens of men, achieved nothing, and more warriors were talking about leaving. That's when something happened that would become legend. One of the most famous shots in American frontier history. Section 11. Billy Dixon's shot. June 30th, 1874, around 9 a.m. The siege had been going on for 3 days. The warriors were mostly staying back, out of rifle range, about 1,000 yards away. A group of about 15 warriors were gathered on a bluff to the east. Watching the compound, they felt safe. No rifle could reach them at that distance. Billy Dixon was on the roof of one of the buildings, keeping watch. Someone handed him a Sharps 50-90, one of the big buffalo rifles. Billy looked at the warriors on the distant bluff. He later said he didn't think he could hit them, not at that range, but he figured he'd take a shot anyway, maybe scare them off. He aimed high, compensated for bullet drop, accounted for wind, and fired. The bullet traveled approximately 1,538 yards, just under 9/10 of a mile. It struck one of the warriors. Some accounts say it was a Comanche chief named Tabonima, and killed him instantly. The other warriors scattered in panic. The hunters inside Adobe walls erupted in cheers, because that shot changed everything. It told the warriors, "You're not safe anywhere. We can reach you at any distance." The psychological impact was devastating. Within hours, the warriors began to withdraw. The siege was over. Section 12. The aftermath at Adobe walls. By July 1st, the warriors had completely left the area. The hunters emerged from the buildings, exhausted, relieved, victorious. They'd lost 2 men, the Shadler brothers, killed in the initial attack. 3 hunters were wounded, but none seriously. They counted the bodies of warriors killed around the compound, 13. But they knew more had been killed at distance and carried away. Modern estimates put Comanche, Cheyenne, and Kiowa losses at 30 to 70 warriors killed. The hunters had won, but at what cost? Section 13, Billy Dixon's shot, the verification. Let me tell you something remarkable about Billy Dixon's shot. At the time, nobody could confirm exactly how far it was. They knew it was far, really far, but without modern measuring tools, they couldn't be precise. In 1879, 5 years later, a U.S. Army surveying team came through the area. They were mapping the Texas Panhandle. Billy Dixon was with them, working as a scout. He showed them Adobe walls, pointed out where he'd been standing, where the warrior had been standing on the bluff. The surveyors measured the distance using standard surveying equipment, 1,138 yards, 4,614 feet, 7/8 of a mile. The U.S. Army officially recorded it as the longest confirmed kill shot in the American West. That record stood for decades. To put it in perspective, modern military snipers train at 801-200 yards. Billy Dixon made that shot with 1870s technology, black powder, iron sights. A single-shot rifle, no scope, no rangefinder, no spotter, 1 shot, 1 kill, 1,538 yards. It was extraordinary. Even today, with modern rifles and optics, that's a difficult shot. For Billy Dixon, it was pure skill, experience, and probably a bit of luck. But it doesn't diminish the achievement. That shot became legendary for a reason. Section 14, Consequences, the Red River War. The defeat at Adobe Walls had immediate consequences for the Comanche Nation. Quanah Parker's grand plan to unite the tribes and drive out the buffalo hunters had failed. The warriors returned to their camps demoralized, divided. Worse, the attack gave the U.S. Army exactly the excuse it needed. Within weeks, the Army launched the Red River War, a massive military campaign to force all remaining Southern Plains tribes onto reservations. 5 columns of soldiers, thousands of troops. Their orders: pursue hostile tribes relentlessly, destroy their camps, kill their horses, force surrender. Over the next year, the Army hunted down every band of Comanche, Cheyenne, and Kiowa that refused to go to a reservation. They didn't fight pitched battles. They attacked villages in winter, destroyed food supplies, killed horses. Starvation and exhaustion did more damage than bullets. One by one, the tribes surrendered. In June 1875, exactly 1 year after the Battle of Adobe Walls, Quanah Parker rode into Fort Sill with the last free Comanche band. He surrendered. The Comanche Wars were over. The great Comanche Empire which had dominated the southern plains for 150 years, was finished. Section 15, the Buffalo Hunters, what they became. So what happened to the men who defended Adobe walls? Billy Dixon became a U.S. Army scout. He participated in several more campaigns against Plains tribes. Later, he settled down, got married, ranched in Texas. He died in 1913 at age 63. Bat Masterson left buffalo hunting and became a lawman. He served as sheriff of Ford County, Kansas. Later, he moved to New York City and became a sports writer. He died in 1921 at his desk, typewriter in front of him. Hannah Olds, the only woman at Adobe Walls, continued running restaurants on the frontier. Tough as they come, most of the other hunters went back to buffalo hunting, made money while they could. When the buffalo disappeared, they moved on to other things. Ranching, business, faded into obscurity. None of them became rich. None of them became famous, except Dixon and Masterson. They were working men who happened to be in the right place at the right time, with the right skills. They survived, and they helped end an era. Section 16, Quanah Parker's later life. Quanah Parker's story didn't end with surrender. After 1875, he lived on the Comanche reservation in Oklahoma, but instead of fading away, he adapted. Quanah learned English, learned to navigate the American legal and business systems. He became the principal chief of the Comanche Nation, a position that didn't traditionally exist, but which the U.S. government recognized. He advocated for his people, negotiated lease agreements with Texas ranchers for grazing rights on reservation land, made sure the Comanche got fair payments. He became wealthy, built a large house called the Star House with a 10-room ranch home. He maintained multiple wives, a traditional Comanche practice, even though it was technically illegal. When U.S. officials objected, Quanah reportedly said, "You tell me which ones I have to tell to leave, and I'll tell them you said they have to go." They backed off. Quanah Parker died in 1911 at age 66. He was buried with full honors, Comanche traditions, and Christian rites. Thousands attended his funeral. He's remembered as the last great Comanche war chief, the man who fought harder than anyone to preserve the old way of life, and the man who, when that fight was lost, worked just as hard to help his people survive in the New World. Section 17, the buffalo gone forever. By 1880, the great buffalo herds were gone. 60 million buffalo in 1800, less than 1,000 in 1890, the fastest large mammal extermination in human history. And it was deliberate. The U.S. government wanted the Plains tribes on reservations, controlled, pacified. The buffalo hunters, men like those at Adobe Walls, were the tool to make that happen. By destroying the buffalo, they destroyed the foundation of Plains Indian life. No buffalo meant no food, no shelter, no independence. Tribes had no choice but to move to reservations and accept government rations. It wasn't military defeat that ended the Indian wars on the Great Plains. It was starvation. And the men at Adobe Walls were part of that process. Were they heroes, villains, survivors, opportunists? All of the above, probably. History isn't clean. It's complicated, messy, full of people making choices based on the incentives and information they had at the time. The buffalo hunters weren't thinking about genocide. They were thinking about making money, feeding their families, building a life. The Comanche warriors weren't thinking about preserving nature. They were thinking about survival, protecting their families, preserving their way of life. Both sides were fighting for survival. Only one side had the industrial capacity, the technology, and the numbers to win. Section 18, the Sharps rifle, engineering that changed warfare. Let me take a minute to explain why the Sharps rifle was so revolutionary. Because this wasn't just a good gun. This was a weapon that fundamentally changed how warfare worked on the Great Plains. The Sharps 5090 was designed by Christian Sharps in the 1850s. By the 1870s, it had been refined into one of the most accurate, most powerful rifles in existence. Here's what made it special. falling block action. Unlike muzzle loaders, where you load from the front, or bolt actions, which came later, the Sharps used a falling block mechanism. Pull down a lever behind the trigger. The breech block drops. Insert a cartridge. Close the lever, cock the hammer, fire. An experienced shooter could fire 8 to 10 rounds per minute. That doesn't sound fast by modern standards. But in 1874, that was revolutionary. Precision manufacturing. The Sharps was made with tight tolerances. The barrel was precision rifled, the chamber was perfectly aligned. This meant consistency. Every shot behaved predictably. Buffalo hunters could zero their rifles at 500 yards and trust that the bullet would go exactly where they aimed. Massive stopping power. The Tum 1590 cartridge fired a 473-grain lead bullet. For comparison, a modern 308 hunting rifle fires a 150-grain bullet. The Sharps bullet was 3 times heavier, traveling at 1,300 feet per second. When that bullet hit, it hit hard. It could kill a buffalo instantly at 600 yards. Not wound it, kill it. It could shoot through light cover, through wooden doors, through adobe walls if it hit the right spot. Long-range accuracy. The Sharps could consistently hit man-sized targets at 500 yards in the hands of a skilled shooter. At 1,000 yards, it was a matter of skill, luck, and wind reading, but it was possible. Compare that to the Springfield carbine the U.S. cavalry used, effective range 300 yards, or the muzzle loaders many Comanche warriors had, effective range 100 yards. The Sharps gave buffalo hunters a 400-500-yard advantage in engagement range. That's the difference between life and death. The cost. A Sharps rifle in 1874 cost about $50. That's roughly $200 in today's money. Expensive. But for a professional buffalo hunter who could kill $500 worth of buffalo in a week, worth every penny. At Adobe Walls, the Sharps rifle was the reason 28 men survived. It allowed them to kill warriors at distances where the warriors couldn't effectively return fire. It was technology determining the outcome of a battle. Section 19. Comanche Tactics. Why they failed at Adobe Walls. Now, let's talk about why Quanah Parker's tactics failed. Because the Comanche weren't primitive. They weren't stupid. They were sophisticated military strategists who had dominated warfare on the plains for generations. So why did they lose at Adobe Walls? Reason 1. They were fighting the wrong kind of battle. Comanche tactics were based on mobility, speed, hit-and-run attacks. They'd strike fast, overwhelm the enemy with numbers and aggression, then fade away before reinforcements arrived. This worked brilliantly against wagon trains, slow-moving, lightly armed, small settlements, no fortifications, cavalry patrols, mobile but limited ammunition. But Adobe Walls was different. The buildings were fortified. The defenders weren't going anywhere. They had unlimited ammunition. The Comanche playbook didn't have an answer for this. Reason 2. Technology gap for decades. Comanche warriors had been roughly equal to their enemies in terms of weaponry. A Comanche with a bow could fire faster than a soldier with a muzzle loader. But by 1874, that equation had flipped. Repeating rifles and high-powered single shots gave buffalo hunters overwhelming firepower. And the Comanche hadn't adapted their tactics to counter this. They were still charging directly at fortified positions, still trying to get close enough for bows and lances to be effective. It was suicide. Reason 3. False promises. Isa Tai, the medicine man, had promised the warriors they'd be invulnerable, that bullets wouldn't harm them if they followed his spiritual guidance. This wasn't unusual. Many Native American spiritual leaders made similar promises during this era. It was a way to boost morale, to give warriors courage. But when warriors started dying, and they died quickly, that promise shattered. Morale collapsed. Warriors started questioning leadership, questioning the attack, questioning whether they should even be there. Once doubt sets in, a military force loses cohesion. Reason 4. Lack of unified command. Quanah Parker assembled 700 warriors from multiple tribes: Comanche, Cheyenne, Kiowa, Arapaho. Each tribe had its own leaders, its own traditions, its own ideas about how to fight. When Quanah was wounded early in the battle, there was no clear second in command. Different leaders made different decisions. Some wanted to keep attacking, some wanted to retreat, some wanted to wait and starve the hunters out. Without unified command, the force fragmented. Compare this to the buffalo hunters. James Hanrahan effectively took charge. Everyone followed his lead. No arguments, no debates. Clear command structure wins battles. Reason 5. Logistics. This is the boring part of warfare that nobody talks about, but it matters. The buffalo hunters had food stored in the trading posts, water from a nearby creek, thousands of rounds of ammunition, shelter and fortifications. The warriors had limited food. They expected a quick victory. Limited water. Had to send parties to fetch it, risking sniper fire. Limited ammunition, especially for firearms. No shelter, exposed to the elements and long-range rifle fire. The longer the siege went on, the worse the warriors' situation became. The buffalo hunters could wait indefinitely. The warriors couldn't. All of these factors combined to create a situation where the Comanche's traditional advantages, mobility, numbers, aggression, meant nothing. They were fighting the wrong battle, in the wrong way, against the wrong enemy, and they paid for it. Section 20. The Other Defenders. Stories from inside the walls. Let me tell you about some of the other men at Adobe Walls. Because this wasn't just Billy Dixon and Bat Masterson's story. William Billy OGG. Age 17, Billy Ogg was the youngest defender at Adobe Walls. He was a teamster, drove wagons hauling buffalo hides. When the attack started, Billy was terrified. He later admitted he thought he was going to die, but he loaded rifles for the other hunters, passed ammunition, did whatever was needed. At one point, a warrior got close enough to try to shoot through a window. Billy grabbed a rifle and fired back, missed, but it drove the warrior away. Years later, Billy Ogg said the Battle of Adobe Walls was the most scared he'd ever been in his life. But he did his job, and he survived. Bermuda Carlisle, the blacksmith. Bermuda Carlisle was the settlement's blacksmith. Big guy, strong, practical. During the battle, he wasn't shooting much. Instead, he was repairing rifles that jammed, fixing broken gun parts, making sure the defenders' weapons kept working. Without Bermuda, several rifles would have been out of commission. He was essential to the defense, even though he didn't fire as many shots as others. Sometimes the most important people in a battle are the ones keeping equipment working. Hannah Olds. The only woman, Hannah Olds was married to William Olds, who ran a restaurant at Adobe Walls. When the attack started, Hannah didn't panic, didn't scream, didn't hide. She loaded rifles, passed ammunition, helped tend to a wounded man. The male hunters later said she was as steady under fire as any of them. In a time when women were expected to be delicate and in need of protection, Hannah proved she could handle herself in a crisis. She lived until 1930, 56 years after Adobe Walls, never sought fame, never wrote a book, just went about her life. But the men who were there never forgot her. James Langton, the man who almost didn't make it. James Langton was sleeping in a tent outside the main buildings when the attack started. He woke up to the sound of gunfire, looked outside, saw hundreds of mounted warriors charging. He ran for the nearest building, Hanrahan's saloon, wearing only his underwear, no boots, no weapon. Arrows flew past him, bullets kicked up dirt at his feet. He made it to the door just as someone was closing it, dove through, slammed it shut behind him. He spent the entire 4-day siege in his underwear. Years later, men would joke about Langton's famous charge in his long johns. But everyone agreed, the fact that he made it at all was a miracle. Section 21. Lessons from Adobe Walls. So what do we take away from the Second Battle of Adobe Walls? Here's what it's not. It's not a story about heroic settlers defending civilization from savages. It's not a tale of primitive warriors foolishly attacking superior forces. It's not a simple narrative of good versus evil. Here's what it is. It's a story about technology determining the outcome of conflict. The Sharp's 50-90 rifle changed warfare on the Great Plains. Warriors who had dominated for generations suddenly couldn't get close enough to fight effectively. It's a story about desperation. Quanah Parker knew his people were dying. He took a desperate gamble. It failed. It's a story about adaptability. After defeat, Quanah didn't give up. He adapted. He found new ways to help his people survive. It's a story about consequences. The buffalo hunters didn't just hunt buffalo, they participated in, intentionally or not, the destruction of an entire way of life. And maybe most importantly, it's a story that proves there are no simple heroes or villains in history, just people making choices, living with consequences. Section 22, Billy Dixon's reflection. Years later, in his autobiography, Billy Dixon reflected on the Battle of Adobe Walls. He wrote about the Comanche warriors with respect. He acknowledged their courage, their skill. He also wrote this, and I'm paraphrasing, "We were there to make a living. We didn't hate the Indians, but we knew if they caught us, they'd kill us. So when they attacked, we defended ourselves." That's all it was, survival. And then he said something that I think is worth remembering. "I killed buffalo by the thousands. I killed men too. I don't feel proud of either, but I don't feel shame either. I did what I had to do to survive in a hard land. They did the same." That's the reality of the frontier. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't glorious. It was hard, violent, unforgiving. And the people who lived through it, on both sides, deserve to be remembered as complex human beings, not cartoon heroes. Not cartoon villains, just people. Section 23, The Myth versus the Reality, How Adobe Walls was Remembered. Here's something interesting. The Battle of Adobe Walls became famous almost immediately, but the way it was remembered in American culture versus the way it actually happened, very different. The myth, how it was told in the late 1800s. Brave frontiersmen defending civilization against savage hordes. The buffalo hunters were portrayed as heroes, defenders of progress, men bringing civilization to the wilderness. The Comanche were portrayed as bloodthirsty savages, attacking innocent civilians for no reason. Billy Dixon's shot was portrayed as divine intervention, proof that God was on the side of the white settlers. Newspapers ran headlines like, "Heroic Defense Against Indian Massacre Attempt." The story was used to justify further military action against Plains tribes. It was used to justify the extermination of the buffalo. It became propaganda for manifest destiny. The idea that white Americans were destined to conquer the continent. The reality, what actually happened. Buffalo hunters were illegally operating on treaty-protected land. They were systematically destroying the Comanche's food source. The Comanche attacked to defend their land and their way of life. Both sides fought for survival using the best tactics and weapons available to them. The buffalo hunters won because they had better technology and better defensive positions, not because they were morally superior. The battle wasn't about civilization versus savagery. It was about resource competition, territory, economic interests. But that's not the story that got told for the next 100 years. It's only in recent decades that historians have started presenting a more balanced view, understanding both sides, acknowledging the complexity, recognizing that hero and villain depend entirely on which side you're on. The Comanche perspective. From the Comanche point of view, Adobe Walls wasn't a glorious last stand. It was a tragedy. It was the moment they realized they couldn't win through military force. It was the beginning of the end. Within a year, they'd be on reservations, their freedom gone, their buffalo gone, their traditional way of life destroyed. Adobe walls was the moment that dream died. Section 24, the site today, visiting Adobe Walls. Today, Adobe Walls is a Texas state historical site. It's located in Hutchinson County, Texas, middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town. There's a marker, a memorial, not much else. The original Adobe buildings collapsed decades ago. Nothing remains of the structures the hunters defended, but if you visit, you can still see the landscape. You can stand where Billy Dixon stood. Look east toward the bluff where he made his famous shot. You can see how exposed the warriors would have been, how far the distances were. You can understand, in a physical way, just how remarkable that 1,538-yard shot really was. There's also a cemetery nearby. Some of the buffalo hunters who died in later years are buried there. Billy Dixon is buried there. His grave marker reads, Billy Dixon, Scout 1850-1913. Famous for his long-range shot battle of Adobe Walls, June 27, 1874. Every year, a few dozen history buffs visit the site, walk the ground, try to understand what happened there. It's quiet, peaceful. The wind blows across empty grassland. Hard to imagine it was once the site of a desperate 4-day siege. But if you close your eyes, listen to the wind, imagine the sounds of gunfire and war cries, you can almost feel it. History isn't just in books, it's in places. Adobe Walls is one of those places. On June 27, 1874, 28 buffalo hunters held off 700 Comanche, Cheyenne, and Kiowa warriors. They survived because they had better weapons, better defenses, and a little bit of luck. One of those hunters made a shot that would be talked about for 150 years, 1,538 yards, one bullet, one kill. It's a hell of a story, but it's also the story of the end of an era. The end of the great buffalo herds. The end of the free-roaming plains tribes. The end of the Comanche Empire. Within a year, Quannaparca would surrender. The Red River War would be over. The American frontier as the Comanche knew it would cease to exist. And it all started with a cracked ridgepole that woke up 28 men at 4:30 in the morning. If that beam hadn't cracked, if those men had still been asleep, history would have been very different. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously. These are the stories that deserve to be told, the complicated stories, the ones where there aren't easy answers. Do me a favor, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find these videos. Subscribe to Legends of the Frontier if you want more. And drop a comment. Tell me, what do you think about Billy Dixon's shot? Incredible skill or just lucky? I read every comment. Next episode, we're covering the gunfight at the OK Corral, 30 seconds that changed the West forever. You think you know what happened? Think again. I'll see you there.